fucking Baltic in here. Hello everybody and welcome to my October wrap up. Please excuse first of all the terrible lighting. There is just, the clocks have gone back and it's November. There's no daylight anymore, especially not when I'm free, so I'm going to be doing a lot of my filming in the evenings, in which case the light has long gone, so we're just going off of just my regular ass light in my room. It's the best I've got. And second of all, apologies for my appearance. I look like a literal fucking marshmallow, and that's because my heating broke the other day and my landlord's taking forever to book a fucking engineer. It's Baltic in here. I've got my fucking heatable hot water bottle up my shirt at the moment. It's so cold in here. Because don't be fooled by the fact that I sit right next to a radiator. Even when this thing fucking works, it does not heat this room. It is November. It is only going to get colder. I am not having a good time. I did, however, have a very good reading month. I took part in the Trick-Or-Treat-A-Thon readathon, and whilst I didn't manage to read anywhere near the amount of books we were asked to do, because we kind of got given a bingo board with 25 books in total on it, I read 8. But for me, considering how fucking busy I am at the moment, it's pretty good, so I was really actually quite proud of myself. So yeah, and a lot of them were very good, some of them not so good, but yeah, we'll get into it, I'll tell you what I thought of them. The very first one I read was a novella, and that was Empress of Sultan Fortune by Nifo. I mentioned this a couple of times already. I absolutely loved this novella. I listened to it on audiobook, which I thought really lended itself well to this story in particular. It's about this cleric who goes out to this sort of lake to see this phenomenon that kind of gives the name, the lake its name, the Red Lake or whatever it was called. And then when she's there, she sees the sort of royal kind of, there's a sort of building on the side, on the lake side, that's this kind of like royal kind of building where the previous empress, who has recently died, was exiled to. And when she's there, she kind of walks past the house and realises there's a woman in there, and this woman's name is Rabbit, and she was a maidservant to the empress. And the cleric, being of the sort of like religious order or something, at least what the clerics do in this world is they take almost like, they take documents and notes of basically historical events and stories and stuff and basically try to document absolutely everything. So our main character then ends up spending several days with Rabbit sorting through the Empress's old things, whilst Rabbit tells her the story of just lots of different stories about her time as the Empress's maidservant, and the relationship they had and the things that happened. And it's through these sort of small stories that you kind of just end up learning what happened when this Empress was alive, who she was, where the country's at now, and almost to the point where you actually want to read the book where that's happening in real time and stuff, because she was a very interesting person, was this Empress, and shit went down, and it was just a really, really great book. I absolutely loved it. I thought that as I said, I thought the audiobook format really lent itself well to this particular story, because it's Rabbit verbally telling the cleric, whose name I can't for the life of me remember, I'll put it here, I'm really sorry. So actually then hearing it just worked really, really well, and I thought it was really great and I really enjoyed that. So yeah, really, really great novella. I would highly recommend it, particularly the audiobook. Next up, I read Daughterzone Read. This was a reread for me, and because the second book was Descendants of the first, which came out last month, and I've been really looking forward to reading it. When I first read this last year, I really, really enjoyed it, but now that I've reread it and I kind of got my reviewer hat on and I'm actually sort of paying attention to what I'm reading, I did find that there were some, formatting things, or at least some writing choices that really, really annoyed me, which is like, point of view changes in the middle of like a paragraph and stuff when you really didn't need to know what that character was going on with them, and just general kind of a lot of telling rather than showing. And I do like the pacing in this one though, and I love the world building. It's got to be my absolute favourite things, and Nala and Sinai start off as really, really great characters, and I also love Sinai's relationship with Mikulu. I think she's a really interesting character, but I do find that a lot of the characters in this outside of Nala and Sinai don't really have much depth to them, and unfortunately that kind of carried on to the second book, but I'll get back to that later. But yeah, it was still a really, really enjoyable read, but not quite as amazing as I remember it being. The next book I read was another novella, and it was another audiobook, and that was The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water by Zen Cho. Now, I'd recently, earlier this year, read Sorcerer to the Crown by Zen Cho, and I did not like that book. I think I gave it 2 stars, and I was being very generous with that 2-star rating. I really just didn't like the writing style, I didn't like the characters, I didn't like the plot, I didn't even like the world building, I liked nothing about that book really. It was just a thing that I read and I found it quite boring. But I was a bit apprehensive by reading The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water. I remember seeing the cover and really wanting and being like, oh, pretty cover, I've gotta kind of go for it. And then I sort of got a free trial of Screams at the moment or something that I'm using, so I was like, alright, well, it'll do for one of my prompts for the readathon. It's a couple of hours long, I'll try out a novella and I'll try it out in audiobook format. And Zen Cho's writing really lends itself to the audiobook format. I absolutely loved this one as well. I did find some of the characters just to be a bit almost not wooden, but just some of the dialogue I find in Zen Cho's stories just doesn't quite do it for me. But I really liked the world building here. I liked the novella format and how it kind of, you know, was almost forced to tell this smaller story just about this really small group of characters, in particular these 2 sort of characters that you see interacting and kind of how their friendship and relationship develops. As well as then learning about the Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water and what that is and just what its place in the world is and stuff. Really interesting novella. I really enjoyed it. I would highly recommend it. It's a very sort of gentle kind of story, not too much going on in it, but like plenty going on and stuff. And yeah, I just really enjoyed it and I would highly recommend the audiobook. The next one that I read was You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. This is one I've been meaning to read since it came out. Again, on audiobook, and it fitted one of my prompts for the readathon. I fucking loved this. Oh my god, it was so good. This is a YA contemporary about this girl who really wants to go to college but then doesn't get the scholarship, so then can't afford to. But in her particular town, prom is a huge thing, and if you run for a prom queen and if you get prom queen or king, basically old alumni of the school have donated money and you basically get scholarships, or at least enough money to pay for your education and stuff from winning prom king or queen. So she decides to run for prom queen, and that kind of like catapults her into like public eye in the school, because running for prom queen and running for prom court is no mean feat, and she's up against her bully, you know, she's up against her own social anxiety and kind of her own thoughts of herself and stuff. And yeah, it's just a really great book. And she's also up against this girl that she kind of ends up having a bit of a crush on, and their whole relationship was absolutely adorable. I really enjoyed reading this book and how she just learns to actually love running for prom queen, you know, because it's one of those things where she kind of goes into it being like, oh my god, this is for the popular people, and like really sneering on it and being like, oh, it's just a means to an end, and then actually enjoying almost the friends she makes and the community she finds with all these other people. I mean, my favourite trope is like, not like other girls, or judges other girls for being popular and pretty and into makeup, and then the girl finds out that actually she's just like other girls and other girls aren't so bad and they're actually really interesting and diverse amongst themselves. Like I live for that trope so much, because I'm tired of the I'm not like other girls trope, and you know, authors and just people in general pitting girls against each other when actually we all have so much in common and stuff, particularly in high school and things. It was just, I loved that, like just that development. It was just a really great story just to see this girl blossoming into herself and really finding her confidence and things. Like, I absolutely love this book. I badly wanted to be some adorable rom-com movie, like, someone adapt this please. I love this book so much. I then read Descendants of the First, which is the sequel to Daughterzone Read, and as I said, I didn't enjoy this one as much as I wanted to, which was such a shame, because I loved the covers of this and I liked the first one when I first read it. But the characters just are not it for me at all. They're really flat, there's no depth. You're supposed to believe in this sisterhood, in this friendship, in this romance, and that are all going on, and you're just told it. There's no showing it whatsoever, and the characters have not developed at all. It's very plot driven, and the characters just don't develop along with the plot, and I just found it, and I found the pacing of this one to be really all over the place. Like, it's all huge big action scenes and stuff, and then lots of really long, ooh, we're training with our magic and we're just gonna throw this lots of information at you and things, but we're not actually, there's no room for anything to breathe. And the action scenes as well are not badly written, but not clear. You know, it's like in storyboarding for animation, you need your things to be clear so you can tell what's going on. I couldn't orient myself in a fight. I didn't know who was where and who was doing what and where this was. This wasn't quite enough description of just the logistics of everything as to who was where and what, and yeah. Certain like just plot twists surrounding characters just fell so flat. Like it was such a shame. I think this book has so much potential. Kind of what my thoughts on Priory of the Orange Tree. If you've seen my spoiler-free review for that, you know that I kind of say it has all the right things, but like none of the execution and none of the depth. I would say the same thing for Descendants of the First. All the right ideas are there. There's just not that depth and not that exploration, and also just unfortunately not that description as well, which makes it feel just quite flat in general, which is such a shame because I was really looking forward to reading this one. I got whiplash though, because the book I read immediately after. So this was on a Friday night, so I finished that one because I sort of forced myself to finish it. I was like, right, I've had enough of this, but I just want to finish it. And then I picked up my next book, which I then almost finished that evening, bar 100 pages, which I finished off the next morning, which is Iron Widow by Jiran J. Zhao. This is one I've been really highly anticipating since I found the author's YouTube channel like last year, where they dunked on Mulan 2020, which was a really great video. If you haven't seen their channel, I highly recommend it. They point out lots of like Chinese historical inspirations in things like Mulan, Over the Moon, Avatar and stuff. So like, you know, accuracy as well as, oh, this is what I'm thinking they're doing here, oh, this is what to me, because like they know a lot about Chinese history and stuff. I think their degree was in it or something. No, it wasn't. Never mind, ignore that point. And yeah, so I've kind of just been thinking about reading this book, so I thought, oh, it sounds really, really interesting, I really like this author's ideas and stuff. Then I saw the cover and I was like, I'm fucking buying this, and then the arcs went out and like everyone was raving about it, so I was like, okay, let's see how it goes, and yeah, I loved it. So good. It's so good. It's about this girl who lives in this kind of world where it's basically like almost Pacific Rim sort of inspired, with these sort of big mecha robot things that are piloted by men and women, and the men are sort of like the big pilots and stuff, and the women basically are almost like sacrificed by the men to power their big mecha pilots and stuff. And our main character, Zetian, volunteers to be a concubine, to be one of the women that goes and is with one of the pilots, because one of the big sort of celebrity pilots killed her sister, who was also a concubine who signed up for the army, and she wants revenge. And sort of when she gets there, she is attacked by the sort of enemy, the Hundans, happens, and they have to, you know, go and fight, and she's the nearest person, so she gets picked as the woman that has to be his sort of co-pilot that night, and she finds that she's actually able to overpower him and kill him and take control of the mecha pilot the mecha suit thing. And everything kind of goes from there, because yeah, and it's just a really, really great book. It's very fuck the patriarchy and fuck the way women are treated historically. Like, it's a really, really interesting blend as well of Chinese history and sci-fi and futuristic kind of ideas, and it's just a really, really, it's completely nuts, but I love it, and it's so fast paced, and there's like just so many relationships and stuff in here that I love, and so many great friendships, and Zetian as a character is just really great fun to read about. And well, I do find that some of it just kind of, it almost felt a bit too linear. I would have liked a little bit more downtime in between a lot of the fight scenes and a lot of the action, particularly between the sort of three kind of characters following Zetian, Yizi and Ximin, and their relationship that kind of forms between the three of them. I really wish you'd actually spent a little bit more time with the three of them, and as well with, you know, Zetian and Ximin and Yizi and Zetian, sort of like pair them off a little bit, just kind of so you could see that get developed a little bit more before it kind of develops into what it goes to in later in the book. And yeah, it almost, but I understand at the same time why the book was as fast paced as it was, because it's very, very easy to almost it not to be interesting enough and for, you know, things to drag. So I kind of understand maybe why that decision was made, but I just would prefer just a little bit of downtime. But yeah, I just really, really liked this. I just loved the feminist rage, because I'm in such a feminist rage mood at the moment, and yeah, I highly recommend this. It's just such good fun. I read it so quickly. The writing's really good and it's really easy to read. I could go on about this all day. I fucking love this. The next book I read was, for the readathon, I needed to have a manga, and I actually haven't read manga in a long time. The only manga I really read these days is I go back to Claymore, because that's like my favourite, and I have all the volumes of that. So what I decided to do was I just went into Daughterzone and I just picked up a manga, just what seemed interesting and what wasn't too expensive. So I picked up Overlord. I quite liked the sort of art style on the front, and it's an interesting edition as well. It's like matte, it's not glossy, which I always find quite interesting. And this is almost like it's about this guy who is really into this sort of RPG game and stuff, you know, VCR, whatever it is where they've got the headsets on, whatever, but the game's getting shut down and stuff, so he decides to kind of go and stay until the servers get kicked down and he's like, you know, booted out and stuff, and he decides to just wander around and stuff. But then when it passes midnight, the servers are supposed to have been shut down and stuff, he's still in the game and can't get out. But he actually is alright with that, you know, the NPCs are like fawning over him and stuff. He's got nothing to really go back to in his real world, so he's just quite happy to just stay where he is. But he's also like curious to see what's happened. Is there anybody else from his world in the game as well? And yeah, so that's kind of the basic premise. And I did really enjoy this. It was a really interesting start. It's interesting from the point of view that I think this started out as an anime and is now a manga rather than the other way around. About 20 pages in, if that 10 pages, you get ridiculous fan service, which is an absolute turn off for me. It's kind of one of the reasons why I stopped watching anime in the first place. I just got so tired of the fan service for male viewers, because yeah, it just really pisses me off. So that kind of put me off a little bit, but then I actually got into reading it, and I actually found some of the like later characters you find. A lot of the setup in here is really interesting. You know, it's about this character kind of being a bit, trying to be apathetic and oh, it doesn't really bother me, but then actually finding he's actually going to go out of his way to help people and stuff. And there's this sort of NPC sort of character who he kind of like saves and forms a little bit of a friendship with and stuff. And I would have been, that would be the only thing that would keep me reading this or make me watch the anime. But I'm not particularly interested in continuing with this. It was a fun read, but not really one I'm interested in continuing. I found the art style as well quite difficult to follow. It wasn't, you know, kind of what I was saying about the fight scenes in Descendants in the first, but actually visually I found it quite difficult to follow. I couldn't really tell what was happening a lot of the time. It just wasn't particularly clear. I almost would have liked some bigger full page drawings of what was happening just to orient myself and where he is and what he's doing. So yeah, that kind of made it kind of difficult for me to read, but other than that, still quite enjoyable. And then finally I read Landfill Mountains by Rab Ferguson. This is a story that kind of takes place after the effects of climate change. You know, the sun's really ridiculously hot, they've got no fuel or anything, they've been kicked out of the cities, and they now live in this small little village at the base of the big landfills. And what they'll do is they go up the mountains every single day to scavenge for different bits and pieces, because there are some people who still have cars that are electrically run, and they can recharge them if they trade recycled materials at the recycling centres for credit. And these people are called drifters, and what the people in the village do is they basically trade their recyclable gifts, recyclable stuff with the drifters, who then provide them with food and stuff, because they're the only ones that can go from the mountain villages to the people who grow stuff, to the people who hunt stuff, to the people at the seaside. And that's kind of how food gets distributed and stuff and things. And you follow this this teenager who kind of has, you know, is always so curious about the old city that a lot of people came from, and whether or not there's still life there, and just kind of wants a better life for himself, his girlfriend and his family than what he perceives they have in the village. And then one day one of his young friends, who's about 6 years old, she gets bitten by a snake, and the kind of witch in the village kind of says that she has about 1 month to live, and this guy Joe kind of gets determined that he'll go to the city and find a cure for her there. And it's basically about him trying to find a way to get to the city, because it's almost impossible to get there. And it's just this really interesting idea about storytelling and stories coming to life, and I love the setting of it as well. I thought it was really interesting that it takes place after, like really soon after climate change. So our main character Joe, his father, you know, is basically our generation, so sort of lived through it and things, and yeah, it was just a really interesting just combination of those two things, of like a very real world problem that is imminent versus kind of like old sort of superstitions about stories and magic and stuff kind of fused together. And the story didn't quite go at all in what way I thought it was going to. The synopsis is almost a bit misleading as to what actually happened, but I just really liked the idea about stories and like their place within this village, and the village itself as well is a really interesting place. I loved learning about how it's formed and what the people there did and their own sort of like rituals and celebrations and community that they have. You know, everyone kind of has little titles they get given. So Joe's grandfather is the storyteller, there's this woman who is the witch, there's a guy who is the librarian, you know, and just this was a very interesting place. And yeah, I did really, really enjoy it. I don't think it quite delves into the idea of climate change and that imminent threat, especially from our point of view, because obviously this takes kind of place after a lot of it's happened and it's like completely too late to reverse anything. I just feel that it almost uses it as a backdrop as opposed to an actual theme within the story, which is almost weird, but at the same time it works. So if I was expecting a sort of story about climate change, I'd almost want the characters to embody more of that exhausted frustration I think a lot of us are feeling towards climate change and the whole thing, and how difficult it is to try and get everyone to do anything about it. Whereas I feel like Joe and even the people who were like lived in the city, they always like say, oh yeah, well, we should just chuck so much stuff out and we just didn't think about it. Whereas like I almost would have preferred if there'd been a bit more of that narrative of we tried everything but it wasn't enough because there wasn't much we could do from our point of view. But it was still a really, really interesting book, and the whole idea of just like the kind of all magic and the storytelling was just really, not weird, but just wasn't what I was expecting from this book at all. But I just really, really enjoy it, and I would very much recommend it to people if you're looking for something a bit more interesting to read. It's very, very different and quite refreshing. And that's it. Those are all the books that I read last month, and I'm just going to do a quick, I think, TBR for November / and December, but at least books that I really want to read like imminently. So the first one that I actually started reading just at the tail end of October, I was trying to get another bingo on my bingo card but didn't quite manage, and that is Son of the Storm. This is one that was the prompt where I had to get a friend to pick a book for me, so my mate Maria picked this one for me. Yeah, definitely going to try and read this now that I've started it. I'm very much interested to see what the hell this one's going to be about, but if I'm being completely honest, I cannot remember why I put it on my TBR. Gonna find out. I also bought a copy of Girl, Woman, Other last weekend. This is usually the type of book I tend to read. However, I've been, as someone who's an artist and I quite like designing book covers, and I'm always sort of interested in maybe doing that as a career one day. Penguin Random House do their like book cover design competition every single year, and one of the options for this year's one is Girl, Woman, Other, so I thought I would read it and find out what the book's about and then maybe design a cover for it and see how I do. If anything, it'll just give me something else to do that's not just my animation briefs and something just more fun that I can work on between now and March. I've heard lots of great things about this book. When I bought it in Waterstones, the lady was like, oh my god, it's so good. So I'm really, really excited to read this, and it'll be something a bit more different for me to read, so I'm very much excited to read this one. I'm also really behind on the Dark Tower read-along, so I still have not read Drawing of the Three and the Wastelands, even though I was supposed to by now. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Siege Talks Books and Stuff is doing a Dark Tower read-along that started back in August, where you're supposed to read one of the books every single month. So they've done Gunslinger, Drawing of the Three and the Wastelands, and then the fourth one they're reading this month. I read the Gunslinger on time. I was going so well, then unfortunately I missed the live show because I was at my uncle's, and then I was going to read Drawing of the Three and Wastelands because I had found on eBay the entire series for like £15. Great! It never turned up, and I actually still need to email eBay about that and be like, hey, give me my money back. So yeah, so because I was spent so long kind of waiting for that, because I always like to give them a lot of time, just because I know that it's a package and I know that it's COVID and stuff and things might still be delayed. However, I think that is definitely not going to turn up. It has been almost 2 months now. So just because of that, I just never really managed to read Drawing of the Three, and then because of the readathon last month, I didn't really have a chance to catch up. So this month I will definitely be reading Drawing of the Three and the Wastelands, and then the third book that I need to catch up on that is this month's read, because I'm determined to make it to the live stream, even if it's just to hang out in the comments and finally give my opinion. But yeah, determined not to drop out of this read along. I'm going to catch up. I've also had this copy of The Box in the Woods for like a couple of months now. I bought it because I was like, hey, I love this series, I want to continue it. Haven't read it yet, really want to. So this is I think another one I'm definitely going to try and get to this month, but at the same time that's 5 books I've already said that I want to read, and I'm really fucking busy. Like, you know, I'm filming this at fucking 10:30 at night, which is usually, you know, I usually go to bed around this time because I'm really busy during the days at the moment, which is fun but at the same time fucking exhausting. But anyway, those were all the books I read this month, read last month, and the books I'm going to try and get to this month, but my priority is definitely going to be the Stephen King read-along. I'm definitely going to be catching up with those ones. Either take them out of the library or I might see if I can buy some copies on my Kindle, which will be means I actually have them here and there and I don't have to wait for anyone to turn up in the post. But yeah, have you read any of the books that I read this month? What did you think of them? Let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear from you. And yeah, have you, you know, just give me opinions. Did you take part in the Trick-Or-Treat-A-Thon? How many books did you read? What team were you on? How else did you do? Let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Feel free to leave a like on this video and feel free to subscribe. I'm posting at least 2 videos every single week. But thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.